Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. This episode is brought to you by Lakestar, one of the leading European venture capital firms. Lakestar's mission is to find, fund, and grow disruptive businesses that are enabled by technology and founded by exceptional entrepreneurs in Europe and beyond. Founded by Klaus Ammels, the team's early investments include Skype, Spotify, Facebook, and Airbnb, and since raising its first fund in 2012, Lakestar now manages an aggregated volume of over 2.8 billion euros across their early and growth stage funds. The team actively advises and supports portfolio companies in marketing, recruitment, technology, product development, and regulatory insight, accompanying founders from seed to early stage, growth stage, or exit. Lakestar's games and media team has made 18 investments, including 1047 Games, Zebedee, Modulate, and Trace. If you're interested in learning more or getting in contact with the Lakestar team, simply go to lakestar.com or check out the details in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Naavik Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and with me I have great panelists as always, including a new face here. We've got Anil and Dave, who you should know pretty well by now, and then Taylor Hurst coming over here from Konvoy. How you guys doing? A little pre-turkey day here for some of us.
Yeah, we're happily not celebrating Thanksgiving Day whilst the only 4 people in the world who aren't.
Well, here in Canada, we've already did our Thanksgiving celebration. We do celebrate it in October.
Dave's so ahead of the curve.
Thank you a lot faster than Americans do.
Well, you're welcome, Dave. And so, Taylor, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah. So we do celebrate Thanksgiving tomorrow. So I guess we have three separate Thanksgiving celebrations. But I'm the principal at Konvoy. We're an early stage gaming fund focusing on pre-seed, seed, Series A investments, predominantly in the technology, infrastructure, and platform side. So the main difference is we do not invest in game studios specifically, but have been there for 5 years now, and we are on our third fund, which was the most recent one for $150 million, and have now done about 7 investments out of that one, and we'll be continuing to invest in the gaming space going forward.
Awesome. I'm sure everyone will look forward to hitting you up now if you want to throw out your email and ask for that spam.
Yeah. My email is taylor@konvoy.vc. Please feel free for anybody to reach out. Always looking to chat with more people in the space.
Awesome. Well, we'll obviously be chatting today, and we've got some great topics. We surprisingly haven't been short on topics lately. It's been actually pretty busy somehow going into the winter here. We've got some stuff around games VC funding, which unfortunately isn't great news. Not all of this is good news. Epic has been going through some interesting times as well with Fortnite and kids playing the game, obviously. So that should be interesting to dig into a bit. OpenAI, if you've been paying attention over the weekend, a lot of fun there. We're just going to kind of sum it up and get into what that might mean. Some good thoughts here from Dave on live operations because he wants to follow up from last week. So that should be a good tie on. If you didn't catch last week, of course, make sure to do that as well so you can catch what he's talking about. And then Embracer with good news as always. Unfortunately, Aaron not here to cheer them on, but we'll definitely get into it. But why don't we just kick off with the games VC funding here?
So according to PitchBook and their Q3 gaming report, last quarter VC firms closed 113 deals for disclosed $857 million. And this is, unfortunately, another decline as compared to both previous quarter and Q3 of 2022. So quarter on quarter, we see a decrease of about 10%, year on year, about 50%. And really looking also at the deal value, the value decreased a fair chunk, about 35% compared to Q2 and 68% compared to this time last year. So as a quick recap, in Q2, there actually was a slight increase in the total value of deals, but the total number of deals decreased 29%. And one of the things I was actually curious to do is take a look back at when it comes to the interest rates, because one of the comments has always been, well, the cost of money is a lot more expensive these days as compared to what it has been. And so one of the things I did was I took a look back at 2018, which was approximately when interest rates were fairly close to where we are today, and took a look at where the deal values were, the number of deals were happening. And it was actually some fairly close similarities between the two. So I'm starting to wonder, as we get into the real normal, which is probably where our interest rates are today, maybe a slight decrease over the next coming quarters and that, but I'm not really seeing a huge decrease. We're most likely not going to go back to the days of almost free money. I wonder if we're also now looking at probably the new normal in terms of deal transactions, value of deals, and I'm really happy that Taylor's here because I'd love to get his take on this, being the expert, and instead of myself just commenting from the sideline.
Where's the money, Taylor?
Yeah, so what I would add to this, because so Konvoy also releases a report on the private the private markets and games funding, and it goes a little bit farther back than focusing on that last year. And the way we actually view this is funding is actually just returning to that pre-COVID level instead of moving off of all that hype, which I think it was warranted. During COVID, obviously everyone was at home. The only good news you were really getting was on any news channel was everyone seems to be playing video games. And so that was really great for the market. Anybody could go, and honestly, with that and low interest rates, it was a perfect storm for being able to raise capital. I think, alongside of, these more hyped up IPOs like your Roblox, your Unity, your AppLove, and, everyone going public, it seemed like gaming was that area we had to invest in. And what I think really happened here was, and this is going to be, I would say, a hot opinion or a hot topic here, is I don't think games investing on the studio side is actually a truly like a venture fundable model. It requires a lot of capital, and when it comes to the VC space, generally you're looking for these milestones that allow you to get to that next stage. And when it comes to games, going from initial funding to an alpha to your beta to then finally releasing a product, and we're talking about 4 or 5 years where you may be waiting for any significant revenue or traction. And to me, I don't think that is actually how games should be judged. But the issue is that doesn't align with how VCs fund companies. And so anecdotally, we are seeing a lot of generalist firms pulling back. And so I think that is the majority of this funding decrease. Is the games funds and your entertainment funds are still interested in this space. But there's not that support from the generalist side or at that growth level anymore, because it's not warranting that valuation increase or that extra funding you truly do need to get to that next stage. And so I think a lot of I do believe a lot of this the concern around like this decrease in funding is partially due to just this uptick in funding that COVID had and allowed for. And obviously, like Dave mentioned, 0% interest rates, capital was cheap, not only for startups, but for VCs as well, who, needed to deploy this capital. You can't sit on the sidelines and just collect management fees forever. And so it is definitely getting tougher. And I think games companies are being hit the hardest out of a lot of other sectors, because it's to me, not a safe bet. And, no one knows what games are going to be successful. I don't think the majority of people would have chosen, or would have predicted the Among Us hype or Fall Guys getting as popular as it did. But everyone wanted to chase this, who's going to be funding the next Fortnite. And I think we quickly found out the people that are going to do that are the publishers. The publishers have the money to do it. They have the balance sheet. They have the wherewithal to understand that waiting 4 or 5 years is actually worth it. And it's not only worth it, but it's necessary. And so we are seeing a lot of capital within the games industry shift from content over to more scalable technologies and platforms that people are looking for. But those don't warrant the amount of funding that games studios did. So we're at a point now where all of this is depressed. And I think we're going to continue to see this. But when you do zoom out a little bit more, it's not as bad of a view as the data shows over the last year, even 2 years. But when you go back to pre-COVID, we are pretty in line with where that was. But I do think we're going to see a lot of VCs that are not focused on gaming really take a step back and be comfortable waiting for those Series A, Series B rounds when companies are able to really prove that they have the ability to maybe reach scale.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think we're returning to what the actual normal is. I think too many people, unfortunately, took the levels that we were seeing during COVID as the new normal. When, as you said, it was really just a blip. I think it would do a lot of people really a lot of good if we kind of took our industry growth curve, just lopped off the COVID bump that we saw. We'd still see, a nice actual curve overall going up. I think we'd still see growth in the industry overall, but at a much steadier rate rather than sort of out of control rates. And I think we will still see. I personally still think that content is investable, but we can have that conversation I think another time, Taylor. But yeah, it certainly is certainly a lot more challenging, especially as everyone's kind of pulling back. If the sentiment amongst the developers and publishers is, oh wow, things have really hit a downturn, then that's going to be a sentiment that's echoed pretty far and wide. If publishers aren't able to go up to VCs and say, hey, we see a huge hockey stick in terms of our revenue growth over where we were, then it's like, well, why would we fund something that is most likely just going to be fairly flat?
Taylor's point about the general VCs, I think, is also especially true because some of these funds will have been around now for maybe 6, 7, 8 years, right? And that's when you'd expect that fund to return its investment. So if some of these general VCs have just got burnt and not seen any return on their original fund, then particularly given today's climate, they're not going to be for it. And I think if you look at the general VC community rather than the more specialized ones, how many of them really did manage to make a good return? There's not so many, right? If you invested early in someone who got by Zynga or one of these other sort of mobile big ones, sure, you've done well. But for every one of those, there's probably 10 that got nothing at all. And I think that's one of the reasons too. I would also imagine that the lack of follow-on rounds for existing companies is also partially responsible for this, because it seems to me that anything get funded right now is things that are just started up right at the very beginning. It's not those that are a little bit further along the line. But interesting to observe anyway.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to add here is I think investors are becoming more cognizant of the exit multiples that a content company justifies, and I think that's a little bit tougher to swallow for a lot of them because it's great. I mean, you can if you build a game that generates $100 million in revenue, that's fantastic for the game, and that's an absolute win. But on that exit multiple side, you're not going to see the same that you're going to get from a general B2B SaaS business. You don't have that growth multiple that can be layered on top of this to warrant an exit that also is aligned with venture scale returns. And then I think another area that just isn't talked about that doesn't need to be harped on too much is a lot of that COVID hype as well, and even the year following was a lot of blockchain hype as well. Everyone seemed to be building a new blockchain game. It was getting overly funded because everyone, VCs and investors wanted those tokens. They were seeing these tokens skyrocket due to a low float that was probably was artificially heightened due to just, I would say, some almost like scarcity mechanisms within that token. And I think that allowed a lot of investors to throw a lot of cash at it, which is also being taken into account in a lot of these reports for games funding because. Yeah, they were blockchain companies, but they were games companies as well. And I think there's a lot of things today that are being looked at in a negative light that is just going to probably affect non-games investors or impact non-games investors for making investments in this space going forward.
Well, I think at this point, then it's pretty much just go cozy up with the Saudis or someone else that's flush with cash. I think at this point, that's still really into games. I mean, I am kind of curious too, like if it's studios that are risky, then you start to look at publishers or start to move up the layers into like bigger companies. Obviously, hey, I'm invested in Microsoft. Am I now invested in a game company? Like those kind of things where you're looking at companies with hedges of other kinds that you could return on potentially. I imagine there's a potential there. But speaking of people throwing around money and now having to cut back a little bit, Epic Games, although in this case they're cutting back, I think a little bit more on certain types of content. If we want to get to that.
Yeah, so on this point, I think it's not just an Epic problem. It's just Epic, I think, is the most recent headline story around trying to age restrict skins for kids under 13. And this is just a much larger problem in the game space when you're building products for a spectrum of age groups. And the content itself isn't going to be built for each individual age group. You're not going to build 4 or 5 different games for your 0 to 7 years, your 7 to 13, 13 to 18, 18 plus, and then, even older. The game is the game. And this is becoming a much larger problem because there's content within these games that is not suitable for each of those age groups. And then on top of that, you have the issue of the advertising side of this. This goes into like Roblox, where Roblox has kind of gone back and forth on their advertising policies of, are we going to allow you to advertise to kids under 13? Are we not? We don't want to have to try to build these silos for each specific age group. But I mean, yeah, we all saw Epic was, fined $500 million for the practices that they were engaging in. And it wasn't. I think there are issues around this when it comes to any sort of like dark space type of processes that you're going with. It shouldn't be, and you shouldn't be engaging with any user with these practices. But the bigger issue is how do you engage with these more these younger age groups that are much more suitable to falling into traps. We've heard about this with loot boxes in the past, and now advertising and how you sell and try to monetize users. And with this, it's interesting because they got the fine, they had excess spending, they've now rolled off their SuperAwesome, which was obviously their child safety and kids tech product. But the actual separation of these entities is now focused more on the advertising side. And I think a lot of companies are not going to want to be engaging in any advertising practices to minors. It's just they don't want to take that risk, even if it is safe. And that's, now we have SuperAwesome buying back or acquiring the advertising tech, while Epic's going to continue to manage their age verification service, which is still a necessary product. But this to me is one of the biggest problems that we're going to face in the next 2 to 5 years. Is how are we going to solve the problem that kids are becoming more digital, so they're going to be within your ecosystems and they're going to be engaging within these ecosystems with age groups that can be advertised to, can engage in these practices, have the ability to make their own decisions. But it's this constant question of, is this a developer's problem, or can this be solved with some sort of technology to make this more safe for kids and allow parents to have more confidence that their kids are engaging with the content that is suitable to them. And so I'm really interested to see how this plays out, because I think we're just seeing the back and forth of Roblox, of Epic. We'll see it with Activision and the Microsoft ecosystem and PlayStation and Sony's ecosystem. And how do you manage the business side of the company, where we need to monetize our users and make the most money as possible, but also make sure that we're not going to be allowing these children or anybody to access content that is not suitable to them.
Yeah, and I think this is a fun one in that we'll use Fortnite as an example. So Fortnite's rated teen. You're supposed to be 13 and up in order to play it. I can guarantee you there's a huge number of people that are playing Fortnite that are not 13. My kids played Fortnite before they were 13. My son still plays it. He's not 13 yet. So I think there's going to be that question of, there is what the game was rated. So they went through the proper channels in terms of getting their games rated through the ESRB. But what is the reality of who's actually playing? And I think when you start looking at the reality of who's actually playing, that's when groups outside of the games industry are really going to want to start getting involved. There's certainly a level of responsibility on the part of the publisher, but at what point, is the publisher going to say, look, we've made a game for a 13-year-old and older. We've told everyone that you should be 13 and older in order to play it. Are they responsible for that 6-year-old that's playing the game because their parents said, yes, you can go and play this game? And I think that's a big challenge for publishers because, they're saying, we're doing everything right, but it's the parents and the kids themselves that are making the decisions to play. So is the publisher at fault for that? Because at some point, then comes in the question for, first person shooters that are rated, mature, as you start putting in advertising methodology or, tracking of data that you're not supposed to be doing with minors. But those games are played by minors. At what point does that transition from a publisher's responsibility to the parent's responsibility?
Don't the app stores have controls for this stuff anyways? Like to block like parental restrictions, like you should be like, hey, you can't install games that are for adults, like and teens, I would imagine.
100%. Yeah, you can go on the console and you can set up as parental controls. You cannot play.
Not that Fortnite's on the app store, but in general.
But on consoles, though, right?
On
Xbox or PlayStation, you can set those parental controls up. I can guarantee you that little Timmy will be saying, all of my classmates are playing Fortnite. You have to let me play Fortnite. Otherwise, they will make fun of me. I will be ostracized by the class. No one will play with me. Everyone's playing that, so I'm missing out on that.
Just wait till that GTA 6 trailer hits.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'll get requests for GTA and that still be the same answer. No.
Thoughts of no?
Yeah, I was going to say the feeling with tech is it can't always solve everything, right? Even if you did think, oh, this game looks innocuous enough and I'll allow my child to play the game, who's to say that then later on there isn't some content that you weren't aware of? That's also an issue. I was going to mention, though, that is it not Sony or someone who's experimenting using facial recognition? So if you're playing the game and it recognizes that you're not the person you said you are. Wow, I don't know if they've done it. No, I believe there was a patent or something, and we discussed it in the previous roundtable that you could do something like that. Or as per Taylor's point, perhaps you need to gate off certain games. Like with Epic, it's very notable how they put more and more content that is targeting different audiences within the same product. There's this festival mode that they've announced coming out soon, right? Which is they bought Harmonix a few years ago. So they're going to basically have like, a rock band type thing in their game. That's probably the sort of thing that you're okay with your kids playing. Although I suppose it depends on the music, right? It could be like the 50s all over again. Don't you be listening to that rock and roll, you nippers, right? But then you could have it that way. But then, you might be happy for your child to experience that part of the game, but you don't like the kind of hardcore battle royale aspect of it. So it is hard. And where does the responsibility lie? I actually don't think it lies with the publisher so much, as long as they adhere to the guidelines, because what else can you do? If it's not your fault, you've gone all the legal things. But perhaps I'm saying that as someone who comes from the development side. So maybe I'm biased.
Yeah, and that this is the issue is the publishers I do believe are doing what they can to be aligned with whatever regulatory body they need to be. But the issue is I think the regulatory bodies just are looking at this as it's not on us. It is on you all. People are going to get around this. This doesn't change the fact that you're collecting data from a minor. And then the other side of this is there's so many regulatory bodies across, on the local side of this, where you may have the ESRB kind of managing this from like a high level perspective, but every country or organization has their ability to say, well, we're gonna change a little bit. We actually want a little bit more, and gaming inherently is global. That is the best way to monetize your product, is to get it to as many people as possible. But when you're talking about going to dozens, if not over 100 different countries, you may have 50 plus different regulatory bodies you have to try to manage and be aligned with and understand where is that child or where is that player base? What is their age? What are the rules that I have to follow there? How does that affect the game content that they have access to? And what we're actually seeing more of is game publishers that are usually on the, I would say, double A to single A side, just saying, we're not going to allow anybody under 17 or under 18. No one can play this game. We're actually not even going to go into markets that are, I would say, a little bit more blurry on their regulations, because we're just not even going to risk it. I would rather lose out on that potential revenue than take the risk of getting the fine that would come with breaking these rules. And so this is just becoming, I think, extremely messy. And I think publishers are just going to be forced to either say, hey, we're they're big enough to be able to eat the fine, and we're just gonna proceed the way we're doing this, which we do believe is the right way. We do believe we are putting up the correct guardrails. But if a kid uses a VPN or uses their parents' credit card or lies about who they are, like we really can't do anything about it, and we're going to try to manage what data we are collecting or what advertising we're allowing on the platform, what type of content is, and it's just we're just going to take that risk, or it's just, hey, we're going to cut out 50% of our market, and we're just going to focus on the one that we can control. And it's just it's not just not as straightforward as I think most people would want it to be. And I think this is going to come down to there's going to need to be some agreement that's like, this is the baseline. As long as you're doing this, we're all good. But we're just not there yet. And that's why we're seeing Roblox and Epic in just the last few months issuing new policies, rolling back these policies, trying to figure out some middle ground. And it's just not clear where we're going to end, because gaming is already where it's at. Kids are gonna play.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point too, it's obviously the UGC stuff that's really exacerbating the problem, in the sense that when a game's rated normally, like what the content is going to be, and therefore it's rated according to that. I mean, in theory, right, live service games could technically be a problem as well, right? Because they introduce new content over time that could be, violating the spirit of what they were rated under, for example, if they wanted to try and sneak something in. Because we're talking about, like, you run into something later. But at the same time, like, UGC stuff's the big problem. And I do remember Roblox was trying to introduce a thing, too, where they were like, oh, we're going to have a section for, like, the older kids. And then I don't know if that ever even went through. I feel like that it just flopped immediately. People were just like, no, I want to play with the older kids. And that's the problem, is kids generally want to be older and want to act older. And that's going to drive them to always kind of like find ways to violate that, right? Then, it's always going to be a problem. But like, it's going to be government, it's going to be publishers, and it's going to be parents, and everyone's going to have to like have a part in it, right? Like no one's going to really be able to get off scot-free out. And then hopefully the fines that are paid go towards improving the situation, and not just towards like, government fine treasuries, essentially. But speaking of things shaking up because of safety issues, potentially, OpenAI had a real fun weekend for a lot of people. I imagine a lot of people really kind of worried about their future there. Just to recap kind of what happened at OpenAI, for those of you that weren't glued to X this weekend and all the drama that came from that, essentially what happened was the board, which, separate from the shareholders, basically fired Sam Altman, the CEO. Was like, nope, you're out. See ya. Like, with almost no notice to anyone, like very, very short notice to all the shareholders, to the staff, to Sam Altman. It sounded like himself. Like I think it was announced over like a Google Hangout. It was like, peace out, you're gone, and that's it. Like, and so, obviously that was a pretty dramatic firing. But what followed was even more dramatic, in the sense that the people that wanted to come with him turned into a much, much bigger situation where, the president also left, and about 90+% of the staff was like volunteered to just resign. Like they signed a letter saying, like, we're out if he's out. Like, we're going to go get other jobs. Because what happened was Microsoft was like, we're happy to have more of OpenAI than 49%. We're happy to just take the brains with us and offer jobs to everyone. Even Salesforce was offering jobs. Like pretty much everyone was like, yeah, dude, we'd love a piece of that. Like, please bring your brains over here. And so the board was kind of like, oh, that's not a good plan, and pretty much tried to like find a way to negotiate and be kind of like, oh, we're sorry. And then it started to look like that was falling through, and he was just, and Microsoft basically was like, cool, they're starting a new company. Both Sam Altman and the former president, Greg, I don't remember his exact last name. We're just going to come over and start a new company, and whoever wants to come over here, cool. Like they're going to be a big part of that. And then it did end up eventually getting negotiated, where it was basically like, tell you what, I'll come back if you pretty much wipe the board. and just like, no, just get rid of them because they're the problem. At least in, we don't know a lot of the details in terms of what went down. Supposedly had to do with like Sam Altman not being like totally like transparent about stuff. I forget the exact terminology. They use kind of weird terminology, but basically saying like, oh, he wasn't being transparent with us, kind of thing. And it could have been over for-profit stuff. It could have been over ethical stuff, safety stuff. There's a lot of things being thrown around, but basically they ended up agreeing to that. Microsoft was like, okay, that's fine with us, like, because we know now we're going to be super tight with OpenAI at this point because we did that. Everyone's going to be like our homies, and therefore, like, this is a good thing for us. So that's fine. And so basically, Sam Altman's back, president's back, and everyone wiped off the board except for one person, which is Adam D'Angelo, got to stay. And they brought in former Salesforce co-CEO Brett Taylor, who's like a Silicon Valley guy who's been around for a long time, and interestingly, an economist and former Treasury Secretary back in like 99, 2001, Larry Summers. So it's like those two and Adam D'Angelo. So Ilya, Helen, and Tasha are all out of the board, which are the ones who we're definitely having conflict with, it seemed like. So yeah, big change up there. But even bigger for Microsoft, because now they're in a position where like they were up to 49%. This is the company that's still kind of leading the pack, and they're still up against Google. And being perfectly honest, Google's stuff is terrible in comparison to most of what we've seen from OpenAI so far, like even in the Bing implementations. Personal opinion, of course, but generally, like in benchmark tests, it's just not up to par yet where Google wants to be. So this is a huge win, I think, for Microsoft, even if it like didn't ultimately end up in their camp. And I think relevant for gaming, because Microsoft even more involved in gaming now after they finally acquired the unicorn that was getting shot at from every direction and managed to pull that in. And obviously, like Activision Blizzard didn't announce they're using anything with AI, but let's be real. It's going to be involved in game production. They're going to look to cut costs and things as people are getting laid off from all of these companies. AI will be involved in that, and Microsoft will now be much more positioned to have a piece of that.
Blizzard did mention that. Well, but just quickly in your game things, saying Microsoft not looking at it, Blizzard did have something they reported that they were looking to use it to generate assets for World of Warcraft. So, yeah, because it kind of makes sense with the kind of, don't necessarily have to support the highest def art style. You need to make loads of content all of the time. So you might see something come out of this. I got a feeling they probably already went down some other route already, but now you can bring everything in-house. So don't be too surprised if you see things in games even quite soon as a result of this.
I do think that overall, the end scenario is probably the best it possibly could be for Microsoft. With the one exception, I'm sure Microsoft would love to have someone on the board now. Not sure how much of a warning even though they're 49% shareholder that they got that Sam is being fired.
It sounded like they didn't get hardly any, and that's why CEO was really, really pissed off at least from public things.
It was a fun tennis match to watch. Just all the things that were happening, going back and forth between where is he? But I do think in the end, it is actually probably the best end scenario for Microsoft. There is still a lot of controversy. There's still a lot of risk around AI. And this gives Microsoft still, open access to everything at OpenAI. But they don't have to necessarily take any of the reputational risk of if things do go south, and they don't have to have all of those things on necessarily directly on their servers and on their
just
side.
On the Bing side of things, right? They got to worry about.
Yeah. They still are able to do a bit of an arm's length, being able to hold OpenAI at an arm's length in what they're doing. So if it goes well, they're able to take full advantage of it, just as they are right now with their integration inside Bing. And if it goes south, then, well, it's supper for Microsoft, and it's a little bit safer for them.
Yeah, and I would just say, it was super fun to watch, obviously, just sitting, being able to watch it from the sidelines. I don't think we'll ever know what really happened, at least in the short term, of, how this happened so quickly to the golden child of AI being OpenAI. But yeah, it seems like the winner is Microsoft here. They obviously they're now seen as more valuable. I think they're honestly gained a lot of respect from the AI community, because I think there was always that concern of, big tech companies acquiring, this AI golden child.
It was the CEO standing up for him, right? And standing up for all the employees.
Yeah. And so it is it seemed just like a massive misstep from the board. I think it's very clear now. With hindsight, obviously, it was a massive misstep. But how quickly this happened, and from all of our, I think our assumption was this happened, within like a 24, 48-hour period of just some decision making, fired, released a statement, and everyone's just caught off guard for it. But yeah, you have Sam Altman and Greg Brockman back with the company, full steam ahead without the board. That seemed to be like this counterweight to what they wanted to do, and it's very clear that Microsoft came out on top. But I think there is some interesting aspects of this that over the next let's say year we'll see how this gets integrated into anything within the Xbox Game Studios and that larger ecosystem, because I think now they have the resources, they have the capital, they have the I think, gosh, if I remember correctly, I really hope this isn't wrong, but it was like Microsoft allocating like $50 billion worth of computing to OpenAI to continue to train these models. I mean, that's not just going to go into Chat GPT and DALL-E. I mean, this is probably going to go into how do you fix the frameworks and processes they use on the game side. And if we're talking about 10, 20% at a minimum decreases in costs, I mean, this is huge for Microsoft. They control it. They're going to have access to everything before anybody else does. And it's funny how we joke about or how we all talked about how upset Sony was with the Activision Microsoft acquisition. But I mean, this seems like a leg up on Sony now. So I mean, Sony's not anywhere near any of these larger AI companies. You obviously have Google, who's kind of stepped back from gaming, but now you have Microsoft with arguably the most powerful and successful games or AI company in history. And I think that's going to be really, really interesting from just, I think, our perspective on this call is just how does this change Xbox Game Studios? How does this change Microsoft's game strategy going forward? Because Microsoft's at the wheel now, and they have access to stuff that no other games company has.
And I do think that the actions by Microsoft over the weekend in trying to hire Sam was as much defensive as it was in support of the OpenAI team. If Sam had gone to a competitor, if Sam had gone to Google, if Sam had gone to Salesforce, if Sam had gone to another competitor to Microsoft, that would have been a big thing. And I really do think that as much of, very publicly it was, we love OpenAI, we're going to support everyone there. Behind the scenes, it was, oh my God, if they take their technology and know-how to somebody else, we're actually a big loser right here. So I do think it was as much defensive as it was supportive.
Absolutely. There was another twist I did actually forget to mention that I wanted to bring up as well, which was like a kind of one of the last minute twists where the board actually tried to see about merging with Anthropic for their Claude model. And Anthropic was just like, nah, we're good. And just rebuffed them. And so there was like some potential conflict of interest where some of the board members had written papers, for example, that had been saying that Anthropic was doing like better from an ethical safety standpoint than OpenAI, kind of bashing OpenAI a bit publicly. I mean, there's some unfortunately, the way that everything's set up with OpenAI is very complicated when it comes to conflicts of interest and missions and profit and everything like that. So that was kind of an interesting twist from Anthropic, especially Anthropic, kind of going like, no, we don't want to get involved in this. And so, so it's good though, because we still have some competition then, right? Like that would obviously not been great for Anthropic and OpenAI to be one thing. We need like competition here between these different tools that may be good at different things, especially for games. But I do wonder if, even if Microsoft's not involved as much in the future, if they start to, shape things a little bit in terms of like, hey, here's what we want to use OpenAI for. And obviously, GPT-5 was in the works supposedly, and they needed a whole bunch of power to do a bunch of the training for that. To the point where I'd heard rumors that they were even like, that Sam Altman was even looking at trying to get chips made and kind of bypass NVIDIA for having enough processing power for this stuff. And obviously the compute credits from Microsoft are making a huge difference as well. But I do wonder if like games might get a little bit more benefit out of GPT-5 now that they've seen that use case, right? That they put GPT out there. They saw how everyone used it, which was part of the point of doing that. And now they can be like, well, games are a use case. Maybe we can make sure that something's in there for games as well when we train GPT-5. Like some possibility that we could see like AI shaping towards some more specific use cases, or just incorporating more of the general ones that people happen to like find a use for ChatGPT with?
Yeah, the Anthropic news or rumor was extremely interesting because as I understand, and again, I always want to preface this with we're just pontificating on a lot of stuff and a lot of rumors, but as far as I understand, the initial issue with the board had with Sam, or Sam had with the board, was one of the board members had written that research paper, judging the safety and alignment of models of different companies, and they're kind of rating them, and obviously putting Anthropic at the top and OpenAI behind them, and that was obviously a concern where you have a board member essentially writing a scathing research piece about how far behind you are on what they believed was important, which was the safety and alignment side. And then, when you lose a CEO, you try to do the merger to try to bring in Dario to become the new CEO of this product. But now you have two products and two companies that are going after this problem differently. And it seemed like that was that was almost like, we have to save ourselves. We have to bring in, what we consider the next best. And we have to bring in the next best that aligns with the reason why we fired the CEO of OpenAI, being Sam. And that was, this, it just seemed like the board wanted to take over. They whether or not the issues they saw were true, they wanted to push the company in the direction they wanted to go in, the one they felt was the right direction. And it seemed like that was shut down very quickly by Anthropic. It was just, no, we're on our own path. We're going to do what we want to do. We're not here to save you all.
I think at the end of the day, the repercussions of this probably won't be obvious for a while. Like you said, we won't know the whole story, but also like why this happened is likely to have some kind of impact on the future, right? Like if say, for example, like the board had a good reason or not for what they did, now they're not there. And therefore, whatever Sam was going to do or wants to do, like, is likely to continue to happen, possibly, depending on the new board. So I think, it may be subtle, it may not be, but we will likely see repercussions down the road, whether that be on safety and ethics or for profit motives or something like that. Who knows, right? Like you said, we're pontificating. We're all getting like just little bits of news. It was interesting as well, like catching Elon's commentary, of course, as kind of his sort of more publicly rivalrous nature with OpenAI in the current state, and some of the other people involved and all that. So interesting takes there if you're bored and want to look at more of the drama for fun, till we get the sort of Tiger King style Netflix special on this. But we'll find out, right? Hopefully in the end, though, I think we're all hoping this is going to be good for games and not Skynet, but we don't really know, right? This is kind of cat's out of the bag at this point, so we'll see. But I think Dave had some interesting continuing thoughts on live operations, because, of course, that discussion in itself is now a live ops.
There we go. It just keeps on going on. I just want to build upon some of the points that were made last week. I think there was a fantastic discussion that was going on around live operations. And really just want to take this opportunity to add in some of my own thoughts. For me, some of the points that I look at in terms of what's going on today, and I'm speaking a little bit more towards the console and PC side of live operations than mobile. If you look back to when, a lot of the games or a lot of the plans for games were being made, which was, probably 2 or 3 years ago, it was a different time. It was a different place. People were seeing how much money that mobile was bringing in, and people looked towards live operations as being the main driver for that. If you look at when companies are putting together their roadmaps in terms of here's when the games are coming through, especially when it comes to the larger companies, at Capcom, for example, I was responsible for a 5-year rolling roadmap for mobile, but the console and PC side does the same thing. What that meant, I think, at that point, where people were seeing a lot of money, a lot of revenue, a lot of attention towards live operations, and said, okay, let's bring that into the console world, into the PC world, without doing enough of a deep dive in terms of what that actually means to actually do that. So I remember when EA, for example, was starting to make the switch from, pure console and PC or packaged goods and started making the move, not just DLC, but moving towards the games as a service model, where it really is a different thought process in terms of how a game is made, how a game is built, how a game is designed, and it. There were people that initial were like, hey, free to play, very interesting. I don't understand how to design a game for that. I don't understand how to actually make a game that where you'd actually block content off, make it behind paywalls, versus building something that's an experience where someone paid their money at the beginning and we're going to give everything to them. There were people that had a hard time understanding the differences in designing games in that fashion. And it's the same thing as the difference between building DLC content and running live operations. They are not the same thing. DLC content is really just an extension of your development time period. You are building a chunk of content and you're plopping it in place. But you're not going through the same process as you are with live operations, where you not only are generating content, but you're also getting those feedback loops. Really good live operations are ones where you're always listening to what the consumers are doing on a day-to-day basis. Not I'm planning out 6 months worth of work and then plopping it down. It is looking at that data from a day-to-day perspective. What can we do to improve? Going on, from a day-to-day perspective, what do we do to build content that's in reaction to the consumers? And so that really is a much different mindset. And I think as people start looking at, let's add in live operations, they weren't taking into account that is not only a switch in terms of what the business model is, but it's also a switch in terms of how do you staff that group of people. How do you, and then going all the way to the beginning of how do you design a game to allow for proper live operations to happen right from the get-go? Because that does require you to set up the game from the start in terms of how you build your core loops, how you build all of the onion layers of the game to allow for live operations.
If you think about it, a lot of this stuff is almost extending MMO design from back in the day, right? Because the other thing that I think doesn't get mentioned often enough about these is this is generally not single player games we're talking about. It's generally multiplayer game environments, and I think that's also a big factor that running long-running multiplayer game environments, even if they're not live ops, is difficult to do. And managing an economy in there, or even if it's not an economy, just people interacting with each other in some way or another. Is difficult to do over even a 6-month span.
It is, and you're even adjusting. What features you're paying attention to, what features you decide you're going to double down on. Other ones where you're like, look, people are just not playing this. They're not digging this. The retention's not there, and the engagement isn't there. So let's refocus and move to a different feature set. Now, the other part that I think also gets a little bit lost at times is the cost of content. And if you look at mobile games where people are building out their live operation schedules, unless you are something like a Genshin Impact, where you are throwing literally thousands of people at building content, trying to build content to a certain scale of visual quality, visual fidelity, your costs become almost on an exponential curve. So as you look at trying to build out, if I'm building out new content for a hyper casual, a hybrid casual, I can build out a new level in a day or two. If I'm trying to do that for a level of quality that is a Sony level of quality, a Microsoft level of quality, an Activision, EA, that is a ton of people, a ton of time, and a ton of cost. And you're not able to get to that same level of ability to react to what your consumer is feeding to you on those charts, that your KPIs that you're looking at on a daily basis. So you're not able to react as quickly, and the cost of doing those reactions is a lot more as compared to what you're seeing inside the mobile space. So I think so there's the comment about, there are, major companies that are now starting to pull back on the live operation side of things for their games. And I think that is actually in recognition of, it's not as simple as just saying, hey, we're going to do live operations on our games now. It's recognition of the games need to be built so that it can have effective live ops. The cost structure is different, and how you're staffing out your team is different. And I think people are now starting to recognize that those are a lot of compounding factors in trying to get live operations right. And the risk profile on the console and PC side, when that cost of content is that much higher, is also now that, that much higher risk as well. So I think those are some of my thoughts in terms of some of the reasons why there's some of that step back. And part of me now wonders is, and this is interesting as we get into some of the Embracer discussion, are mid-sized publishers potentially in a better place to be able to do live operations if their visual fidelity isn't necessarily the same level, their cost and risk structure isn't the same as trying to do, live operations for God of War, for Activision, for Call of Duty, or any of those that where the really high level quality of fidelity.
I'll throw in the one final twist too before I throw it over to Anil, which is that the other thing is the tech infrastructure on these in dealing with publishers. Not publishers, but the gatekeepers of consoles or the app stores. In that, if you want to change content, you either have to have a very complex tech infrastructure to be able to do that without shipping an update, or you have to go through the process of shipping an update. On console, you're going through certification processes and all that complicated stuff to ship an update. On the App Store, you're still dealing with, like, every time, you go to ship an update to Apple, you're rolling the dice and hoping they don't deny it for some random reason. On Google's side as well, there's, delays. You don't know exactly when that update might go live. And all these things, like, just extra complicate the stuff if you don't have the tech infrastructure necessary to push, like, over-the-air updates. And I've seen, like, companies have to learn that on the fly, where they're like, oh, we're slowly shifting some more of this data to be, like, in the cloud or to be, like, in a way that we could push out. But then you've got to worry about, like, safety and security. You can't have that client side where people can get to it, all that kind of stuff. Then you have people data mining because you're trying to ship stuff out early. And, like, there's just so much to that. But I think it has something to say, Anil, as well.
I was going to touch on what you just said there, and actually it was a question for Dave. Does it surprise you, though, that they're pulling back so in such significant ways, given the time it takes to get there? Because I was going to say, as someone who's experienced both those worlds, both the kind of console PC side and the mobile side, that mobile didn't just start as kind of live service and having these amazing feedback loops, right? It started of just kind of being the same kind of box products, and let's try the occasional update. Oh, these are working quite well. Maybe we should do more updates. Oh, hear me out. What if we did these updates like every 2 weeks? What about every week? What about every day? That's what they're doing on Facebook, right? And it took time, and then the tech that you just mentioned, building that, Devin. And I guess it doesn't surprise me, for example, that, like, if you had a portfolio of 12 games, like, whoa, that's way too many. But I kind of feel that, like, you can see that the returns are there, and you've got to kind of tough it out, right? Like, how many failed mobile products were there before a company actually gets the one that becomes, like, the cash cow for the company? So it does surprise me a little bit if they're, like, completely pulling back on the strategy, because I just feel that, like, the rewards are there. It's not going to be something you solve, and you've literally got to build up that experience and know-how. And everyone always underestimates it from both sides. Like, people on a console side don't realize how fast you're supposed to go. Then you might start hiring people from the mobile world who think they know everything. They're like, whoa, why does it take so long? Because they're not used to the quality. And so, you almost have to get this new team together, make them a nucleus of them and then trying to get it. But I do find it very interesting what you said about the mid-sized publishers. That is quite possible. I think if you've got a strong product that the community really likes, I often reference Baldur's Gate, even though that game did take a long time to make, but it's maybe not as AAA as, like, a superstar game maybe on console or PC could be done. But if you take something that players actually like, and then you can start building it, and then that may actually not hold you back. So that's quite an interesting point. But I've rambled a lot, so I'll see what you think about things.
Does this leave some room then for contractors to maybe be live ops experts in a situation where you're like, hey, we don't have, like, we're great at developing the initial game, we're great at developing content, development. We're not great at the live ops side. We'll work with a contractor who's great at managing that and to be a managed service. Like I remember, for example, when Rainbow Six was like having trouble constantly scaling keeping the game updated while also managing the people on other projects, to the point where they're like, hey, Ubisoft Barcelona, you're not doing enough right now. Why don't you help us with our game balance? We'll just task you with just that, where like they start to piecemeal out certain areas that require certain amounts of time and stuff they just don't have the staff capacity for, or maybe the technical capacity, or maybe the know-how. Like you're talking about like, smaller level people, maybe not having, the same level of skills, or people that are pulling back, maybe they could pull back and contract it out to someone else. Because, there's a lot of companies struggling for cash right now that I'm sure would love to be contracted out to and leverage that expertise that they have.
Yeah, I'm certain they would. I think for some of the larger ones, I think you are going to get into the challenge of what your pipeline actually looks like. So when it comes to mid-size or smaller companies, they're probably going to be working inside tech stacks that's very familiar. You're working inside Unity. You are working inside Unreal. For some of the larger companies, you're going to be dealing in proprietary tech stacks. So, Frostbite for EA as an example. So there will be some elements that you will be able to put out, but I think in other cases there will be a bit of a challenge. 100% right that the tech stack needs to be designed with the game up front, Devin. So yeah, those decisions in terms of how you're going to distribute content has to be made early on. It's again something you can't just bolt on at the end. And I think even companies that have both the mobile side and the console side. I know at least in some of the earlier days, there was a little bit of no, we make real games. We make console games. You mobile people, you don't make real games. You're just making.
Till they got jealous of the money.
Making fluff. I think even today, when people look at, mobile makes over 50% of the overall revenue inside the games industry, I think there still is, in many cases, a pretty hard defined line between the real games of console and PC and then the mobile stuff.
I think it's weird too when we're very US centric in terms of not only that point of view, but also where a lot of the stuff happens, right? Because the US is such a big part of the games industry as it is. And we are a very kind of us versus them when it comes to gamers versus mobile people. And we're not one of those nations that's very mobile first kind of thing. I think that creates this kind of weird dichotomy. And so we're almost going through these weird growing pains as games are starting to try and get there. With Apple trying to show off hey, we can have real games on our phones now. That sort of thing, where we're trying to get parity, right? Obviously we're obviously not getting the Nokia Engage again anytime soon, hopefully. But that sort of idea of well, we want to bring it down to that level. We tried to do tablets that didn't really kind of fill that game space. We haven't really found a good in between. And there's people trying to release PlayStation Portal, or, you've got the handhelds like the Steam Deck. They're trying to kind of be that in between. So real gamers can still play games on the go. And then cloud, trying to make its way in there and stuff like that. So it seems like we're trying to find that middle ground, but with the US kind of being a big part of that. Whereas I think if Japan was running this all day, it'd be yeah, dude, mobile games are just fine. Handhelds are great. Part of it, we don't have this dichotomy here.
And I think the big part of that, though, even a lot of this even goes back to how gaming started in each of the regions. So I think where you look at in terms of that divide between console and PC exists more in North America and in Europe. Because if you look at how games grew inside both of those areas, it was very much North America, console, packaged goods. Europe, PC, but still packaged goods. Asia, as you look at how their game infrastructure raised up, in many cases, it was server-based. It was free to play. And so the easiest way to access games, in many cases outside of some of the cafes, was on your mobile device. So certainly, looking at how game cultures grew up, it certainly had an influence on that. But yeah. But I am interested, especially as I start seeing more mid-sized publishers start popping up. I am curious to see, what the difference is. And I guess
we'll just wait till games as a service is mixed with the blockchain. It just only gets crazier, right? And you got to figure out that tech stack too. But speaking of huge mismatches of game culture and whatnot, Embracer, unfortunately going through some more, is it growing pains or shrinking pains at this point? I know.
Ooh, that is a low blow. I feel for them. Well, look, firstly, commiserations to anyone that's affected. It's never nice to say about this, but I think this is still an interesting topic because Embracer Group is something that we talk about the Roundtable quite a lot because of their kind of strategy over the last couple of years. But actually, having Taylor here would be pretty good to get his take on it, I have to say. So let's just go through the bad news first. So they're laying off 900 people, which is 5% of its total workforce. You know, if you remember, they went on a huge acquisition spree over the last couple of years and built up quite the portfolio. They have said that since the end of Q2, they have been working on restructuring, and that has something that has been ongoing over the last sort of 2 years. But they say that they're not going to comment on specifics, but further restructurings, closures, buyouts are in process, and that can lead to additional headcount reductions. But potentially that means they're maybe not done in terms of buy and also. But who are affected? It's been rumored that the Free Radicals devs who make Time Splitters has been closed. That would be very sad. That's a very beloved game. Crystal Dynamics, who make Tomb Raider, they've lost 10% of its workforce. There's layoffs at Beamdog, who make Knights of the Old Republic, if we're ever going to see that version of the game, which is something a lot of people are waiting for. Zen Studios, who make Pinball FX. There's allegedly up to 15 projects that they say have been written down. I'm not quite sure what that means. They claim that's not the same as being, written off as something else. I don't know. Some accountants speak. Maybe we can look into what exactly that means. But I guess they're never going to see the light of day. And perhaps the biggest news is that Gearbox is allegedly up for sale, who of course make Borderlands, which would be huge. So there's a lot to kind of take on there. For me, like I say, I wonder, especially given that, I like it when our roundtables sort of do come full circle. So starting from the top of the show to kind of now with like the VC funding scenario, is this just because maybe they were overzealous in the early days? And, I think the feeling at the time was they were buying a lot of companies at the very top of what their valuation was compared to what they were. Is this more that they feel that they can extract more out of it with a better, more consolidated strategy? And what does this mean for like the overall industry going forwards?
Yeah, it's clear that, or it's clear to, or I believe it's clear that what's happening in the games industry is it's just getting more competitive. It's extremely hard to consistently release games now that are going to be these massive hits. Obviously, if you look at kind of some of the largest companies like your Sonys, your Microsofts, your EAs, they have these ongoing franchises that are they're ingrained into the gaming ecosystem, and they're going to come out every single year at the exact same time. They're going to be adopted by the exact same users. As much as we all tell ourselves, I'm not buying the next Call of Duty, I bought the next Call of Duty the day it was available, every time. And I think when you look at Embracer and their structure, they do have a lot of beloved titles. They have a lot of these developers and publishers that are absolutely loved by their community. But what I get concerned about is those communities aren't growing in the same way that other franchises are. And it's just making it extremely hard to justify investment going forward. And I mean, we obviously have Savvy. I don't know if you guys talked about it before. Yeah, Savvy pulled out of their deal, which, I mean, that might even just be more so the issue here. I mean, we go back to the discussion at the very beginning of that's an investment. That's an investment in the growth of Embracer and their ability to continue to release content. And it seems like Savvy may have either, whether or not it has to do with anything internally at Savvy, probably looked at that and said, the investment return opportunity is not as clear as we were hoping for. These games are not going to probably be the Call of Duty live ops type of experience, or a Fortnite where we're going to be generating billions of revenue a year off of them. They'll get released, hopefully be successful at launch, but just like a lot of the games I think within their portfolio, those first 30 days are what's most important for them. And I think it's getting to that point now where the portfolio that Embracer has built is not in line with what the market is looking for, especially from an investment perspective. And it's just, like you said, we're never celebrating layoffs. It does seem like this is a necessary concern. You cannot support that many games that I think are too reliant on initial game sales. Could you do Borderlands as a full live service game in the last 10 years? Maybe, but I don't think you can. I don't think the game's built for that. It's built for that, 2000s, early 2000s to 2010s time frame where I'm going to buy a game, I'm going to get a full game, and that's it. And you're going to sell 50 million copies of it for $70 and fantastic. But that's not what the game industry wants anymore, or at least like what the consumers want anymore. They want a game that's going to be changing over time. You may be able to do this on a one-off. Like I think God of War is always a great example of this. Fantastic game, not built for live service, but every year, or every 5-7 years, it'll sell, just like Grand Theft Auto. But you got to put so much capital behind that, and I just don't know who's taking the risk on Embracer's portfolio that they'll be able to invest in those game titles and see a return that's worth it.
I think part of the other challenge that Embracer is having, and I think it really, in many cases, just comes down to expectations around marketplace, is their organic growth is just not there, not to the levels where it really needs to be. I think if you look at that strategy of bringing together a portfolio of companies and games, it makes sense that they were always increasing the value of the company, but they were doing it through M&A. But there was the expectation that organic growth was going to be the thing that once you've kind of got that giant boulder rolling down the hill, that the organic growth was going to be the thing that helped keep it moving. And as more and more reports have come back in terms of what Embracer Games have been able to do, that organic growth hasn't been at the level that it required, especially as the cost of their debt has been increasing that much more. It's not being offset by the organic growth that the company is seeing. So I think that is a big part of it. I think interestingly, if you look at what other big companies have been through in the past as well, and I'm going to point at both EA and Activision in this particular case. There was a time when EA and Activision, they published a ton of games, a lot of games. But these are games that were doing 1 million units, 2 million units, 500,000 units. And what they came to the realization was, it's not worth us doing all of these games. Instead of us having a very large portfolio of a bunch of games that maybe do 1 million units in sales, 2 million units in sales, let's make sure that all the games we do are 5, 10, 15, 20 million unit sales, and only do those. And what happened at both Activision and EA, when they came to that realization, they not only shed the titles, they unfortunately also laid off a good chunk of people. Because they realized, that they're spreading a whole bunch of people across a number of titles. Let's just concentrate them on a few.
It makes me wonder that we're talking about the bigger companies that Embracer picked up and what their fate might be, but I worry about the smaller companies underneath those companies. So there was a lot of these companies they bought had a lot of subsidiaries and other companies they picked up along the way, Asmodee, which is even in video games, has a ton of board game companies underneath it, and then a lot of these other game companies also have subsidiaries. And it's what happens then to those kind of ones? I don't think they get piecemealed off. Do they just get, we got to make internal cuts at your company, which means cutting that subsidiary and things like that. This is not just a problem for those bigger acquisitions that were announced so much as even the ones within them I would worry about.
Yeah, and I actually really think it's a good point that Dave brought up on this, the M&A strategy as a business. And why this works for some companies and doesn't work for other ones. Anil, you brought this up. I bet far more people know who Gearbox is than Embracer is. But Embracer owns Gearbox. But when you think about this from an ecosystem perspective, it works. The M&A strategy works if your plan is to keep as many people within your ecosystem as possible. This is why Xbox and Sony's strategy is either we're going to have our first party studios. We're going to go acquire studios because we want to keep people in the PlayStation or Xbox ecosystem respectively. And that's extremely valuable. But Embracer doesn't have an ecosystem. Their ecosystem is we just own a bunch of studios. We're going to fund them. We're going to hopefully distribute these games into other ecosystems. But there's almost no way to keep these users within your ecosystem, which then helps with this, like Dave brought up, the organic growth of your other games. Activision getting acquired by Blizzard is great Activision getting acquired by Microsoft is great because now this game's going to be recognized in the Microsoft ecosystem. Obviously, they've mentioned they're not going to take it out of other ones, but Getting people to play in that ecosystem allows you to discover other games in the ecosystem, which then increases the value of your entire portfolio of games. Gearbox is probably not helping Embracer increase the revenue or users of other games. And that is just, the strategy does not work. You just become a holding company. And with debt becoming more expensive, how do you continue to fund all these companies? These are each individual siloed projects that have to be successful on their own. There's very little cross pollination. Obviously, they probably do some through email marketing or whatever it is. These are all my customers in this game. I'm just going to send them that we have another. They should download this game. But that just doesn't work from a consumer perspective. That's why platforms are important and key to the success of these largest games companies: Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft. Like they're big because they're not just a games company; they're a platform. Their brand is at the top of that. Not these individual subsidiaries that your hardcore gamers understand, but the majority of it just say, I have an Xbox, I play the Xbox games. No one's saying I play Embracer games, and that is an issue. It's just there's no brand value behind the overall organization. It's all in these individual subsidiaries that can be successful on their own, but can also fail on their own and drastically affect the bottom line of that parent organization.
I guess the last bit of question is that an opportunity for Sony to step in and be like, hey, maybe we can pick up some of these kind of cheap that, we've been kind of slow on picking up companies outside of Bungie and stuff like that, especially when you've got former Square Enix properties mixed in there, right? Where that's an opportunity for them because those obviously align well with the customer base of PlayStation. Right? Maybe they pick some of that stuff up. Maybe this is an opportunity to be like, cool, well, we'll go hit the bargain bin at Embracer and start to shore up our competitive, nature against Microsoft now that they've got, all of Activision Blizzard and everything else going on.
I think there may be a couple inside there, but I mean, if you look at where Embracer was purchasing their companies, was more the mid-tier level. And I think it would take it would take more than just investment inside purchasing the company. I think it would be an investment inside the company and the teams themselves to ramp them up to something that is the equivalent of, okay, now you guys are making God of War. So I think it would be a bit of an expensive purchase, not just on initial price, but what the secondary cost would be. But there certainly are some interesting games in there. I mean, one of the things I love Sony for is their single player games, and Tomb Raider has been that in the past, and I think that that is an example of a game that could be that again.
Well, now they've got the portal, so you could play it from another room in your house.
There we go.
So lots of great stuff going on today. Obviously good news and bad news. I think it's going to be kind of that for a while here. I think we're going to have kind of some ups and downs as the game business goes through a bit of a shakeout, which is, it sounds like a little bit necessary, but obviously painful. And we always hope that everyone here, involved in these ends up in the right places, some good places, or, maybe panelists on the show at the very least, so they got something to do. But, lots of stuff coming forward, I imagine as well for Embracer and all the companies underneath it. I imagine some games might get canceled. Some games might get pushed forward, hopefully not kicked out prematurely, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully they'll be able to stabilize in the near future and we won't have to talk about layoffs, hopefully too much more into 2024. I mean, I hope we're kind of hitting the end of that because it obviously is something we've talked about a lot, and that's because it's a big part of the industry right now, unfortunately. But we hope all of you out there listening, especially if you have been affected by those layoffs, are doing well and managing to find some way to have a happy holidays and move into that positively, even if it's through some contract work or something else like that. But, do your best. And I just wanted to thank our panelists, of course, and we've got our, new panelists here. Taylor, thank you for coming on, and our fill-in panelists as well, coming in from the non-Thanksgiving countries. So we appreciate that as well. And of course, listeners, you're probably catching this a little after Turkey Day. So, thanks for listening. Hopefully, maybe taking a break away from the family for a minute to tune in, hopefully. But anyways, have a happy holidays. I want to thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.navic.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Navic Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.navic.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.